So the real introductions here is talking about an artist I'm very familiar with, based on the fact that when I started Hefner Galleries back in 1976, Alten was one of the main guys that we carried. Perhaps the greatest thing about working with Hefners too is they dealt from 1913 on, and so I started in 76, in historic frames. So not only did I get a chance to learn about art, but I got a good chance to learn about frames, the construction, and not so much always what it looks like here, but what it looks like on the back side and what's underneath everything. So it's all of this kind of comes together as the paintings were come together that were going to be offered to George, that he ends up buying to donate to this gallery. So I thought this is a great place to start because it really gives us an idea of Alten and his own mindset. So this painting is dated 1900. Now by this time, Alten has really tried to be a professional artist without doing anything else to make an income for about 2 years. He's been working at it for about 5 years, but for 3 of those years he was working also at the art supply shop that his mother-in-law owned. But about 1898, he decides that's what he's going to do full-time. So the first few paintings that come in, and there's nothing here I can really show you right now, but you see that they were made, the frames that he put on them were definitely more inexpensive frames. So there's really 2 ways you can make a picture frame. There are companies that would make links of molding, 8 to 10 to 12 feet long, that would all be pre-finished. And they would sell those to frame shops. And the frame shops, when they sold that frame, would of course then chop that frame into the sections needed and join it so that it could go on the painting. So that's just called a length molding frame. By 1900, at least based on this painting, Alten had graduated to the fact that, hey, he saw the difference of what a finished corner frame could look like. So what is the difference? Well, in a case of a finished corner frame, he has selected a profile, he selected a finish, and then what they do is all the underneath of these moldings are all joined when they're still raw. And then they're all puttied. And then they're all carved or ornamented. And then they're finished. So that really when you look at them, you do not see any of the miters going through. And you see that everything's planned out here according to whatever the pattern was. So what makes this kind of unique is we're in the time period still, 1900, still Victorian time period. Still highly ornamented frames were in vogue. And Alten kind of did this great still life and I think goes, I want a great frame. So what existed near us in Chicago was a company by the name of Newcomb Macklin, a company that started back in 1871, but had been taken over by 2 guys that were bookkeepers about 1883, whose one name was Newcomb and last name was Macklin. And they started forging forward, making, I would say, some of the best frames that were ever created in this country. And so Alten then, I'm only guessing, visits their showroom with his painting, selects a frame that he wants to have put on it, places the order. Now, what the family still has in their possession are original crates from Newcomb Macklin that were sent to Alten. So we know that that's how some of these things work. And as a matter of fact, if Jim Straub, who of course maintains the catalog raisonné for Alten, were here, he would explain to you that he found a letter in which Alten complained about the freight he had to pay. It was $1.75 when he thought it was going to be $1.25. But of course, if we remember this was 1905, maybe that 50 cents meant a lot more then. So with a frame like this, really what this is, part of the Victorian frame too, was it really wasn't usually made out of one specific piece of wood. This specific frame is made out of 3 pieces of wood. Actually, and I'll have to remember on the back here, I think this is 4. So you've got this molding here, say approximately 2 inches wide, this molding here about 1 inch wide, the next molding about 1 inch wide, then this outside cap that's maybe about 2.5 inches wide. So all those then are all cut, joined to fit each other, ornamented, all gold leafed, then all assembled. So you can imagine, here's what I wish I had, the bill for that frame. So we could go, what does this really mean? Was it $17, which, because today a frame like this on the market could be something that might sell for 10 or 15,000, based on the fact that it's in such excellent condition. So this is gold leaf. Gold leaf is beautiful, but what happened is if you had cleaning people or a housewife that wanted to keep them exceptionally clean, many times they would go over them not with just a dry cloth, but a damp cloth, because that's going to pick the dust up. But the problem is gold leaf is laid in a water-based size, so it little by little strips the gold leaf off, so you end up with all these white spots through here. Now, this had only a couple, although you won't find them now because we did a little touch-up on it. But one of the things that impressed me when this came in is how what incredible shape it was still in for being all gold leaf.
How old is it? So it's in
1900, the painting, and 1900 is the frame.
it is the original frame.
It is the original frame, yep. Actually, and there's another way to almost tell. The painting itself is 1 inch off a standard size.
Really?
Yes.
So that's more difficult.
It's not so much more difficult, but you know now that probably no one found another frame and stuck on it because it'd be incredibly difficult to find one that's 1 inch off. Now, so when we got it, because this was not something I sold George, but the painting needed to be cleaned, which is something we hire a professional restorer to do, but the frame still needed to be cleaned. Now, the way you clean a gold leaf frame is, of course, not with water, but with velvet. So you take velvet, you take a piece of velvet, and you start to polish it. And what it does is it takes off, for the most part, the dirt itself will pop off of gold leaf because it's so slick. And when we got done with this, I had to say that is just one of the greatest frames that we ever had the opportunity to work on. Yes?
How do you know that that frame hadn't been touched up with gold leaf?
Gold leafing is very difficult to touch up. So if you're going to see, and generally you could almost say the only way you can do some type of touch up is there are several products that are out there on the market, but you can look at them generally and go just like this and go, oh, I see a touch up. But what we have come up with is a new cream, because this had so few little spots that I almost guarantee you could never find them. One of the problems with gold leaf too is underneath this is what they call a gesso base. It's a white base, and so that would be all applied first, and then sanded smooth, and then all this laid on top of it. So you wanted this really slick surface to go on. So sometimes when you clean off the gold leaf and you start to touch it up, it will not stick to that gesso base because it's too slick. So I believe this was almost in mint condition. The family he bought it from, I think, where's the best place to put a framed painting so it does not get damaged? On a wall. On a wall that you enjoy. Where is the worst place? Attics, basements, closets, every storage facility you can think of, because you're bound to lose something. Something's bound to get knocked off. So next in line here, just to move forward slightly, we've got a painting here that I think we've got about 1902. So this is also the original frame for this. We could tell again from the back. It is a slightly different size. I believe this is 17 by 22. A standard size would be 18 by 22. So I do not know who the maker of this frame is. It didn't bear any maker's mark. Most frames don't. That's the truth. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bring something back and show you something here real quick. This is just a little bit later, but by the turn of the century, a Newcomb Macklin frame, most of their frames, they put this spline in if they had any type of width. This is they're the only company that did this. So this becomes kind of an identification mark. You look at the back and you go, oop, it's a Newcomb frame. So it was put in there to reinforce the corner, and it, for the most part, usually did its trick, allowed it so it did not split in the center. Now, there are some frames people list on places like eBay and say it's a Newcomb frame because it's got the spline, but they put the spline this way. Actually, that was a practice of the French, definitely in the latter half of the 19th, maybe first quarter of the 20th century. But so people didn't get the idea that it had to go parallel with a miter to really be a Newcomb frame. Then Newcomb also, you can't quite see it because it's somewhat obliterated, pattern number, which is always a 4-digit. A finish number, which usually starts out by saying MET or METDJ to indicate that it was a metal leaf, or Met DJ is metal de Jean. It's a French metal leaf. It has a tendency to be a little, sometimes a little yellower, a little greener, because gold metal leaf can be done in generally about, Newcomb did about 38 different finishes in gold metal leaf. And based on what they would put underneath, this one's difficult to see here because it's this frame actually, not to digress, but in 1979, Newcomb closed. And for the most part, they were sold off to a place in LaPorte, Indiana, called Thanhart Burger. But Frank Vandermark, who I worked for, had salvage rights to the Newcomb factory. And he also had me, and I had a 24-foot U-Haul truck. And I made 5 trips down to clean out everything that we felt was usable out of the factory, including hundreds of samples, hundreds of pieces of ornament. Yeah, that's exactly right. As a matter of fact, today I finished a frame that was the last piece, it was this long, of a piece of raw molding I took out of Newcomb in 1979. And I still have a certain amount of stuff left on the shelf, but it's just kind of interesting. So, so when we get to something like this then, this came in, but somebody had actually painted this frame. So it was something that happened quite a bit. You get past the Victorian time, people go, oh, we don't like the bright gold frames, or it gets a little nick in it. What do? Don't touch it up, paint the whole thing. So when George acquired this, of course, the painting we had cleaned, but then we sent the frame down and had it regilded. So this is a new gold metal leaf finish, but for the most part, still, I hope, appears to be the original frame. Same is kind of true over here. Painting from 1911. Kind of an unusual frame here. There's a fairly good possibility Alten carved this frame.
Really?
Alten himself carved, we know, a few frames. It's stated in an interview he did with the Grand Rapids Herald, I believe in 1913, that he carved a few frames over the winter of 1912 to 1913. This would have been just before this. But what is different about this is Newcomb was so exact in everything they did. But if you look at this length here, and you look at this length here, and you see they are not the same. And you go, oh, Newcomb did not make this frame. You could tell.
He wanted that.
He probably was aimed at being exact, but how did he do it? Well, carve the corners first. You know, then, okay, I'll carve the center in. Well, if you're off by a ½ inch one way, you are now off by an inch.
I think he did a great job.
He did quite an excellent job. I think we have seen about 6 frames that we can almost surely say are...
How do you know that's not upside down? And maybe the larger one should be upside down.
Well, the key would be is if we took out a tape measure and measured everything,
Right.
then we would start to say, so this looks a little more even, but this looks just slightly wider than this, and that looks just slightly narrower than this. So I don't think it was anything he meant on purpose. Now, sometimes there is carving that is meant. It can be the charm, and the truth is if you don't point it out to people, generally they're never going to see it. Also, now just an interesting aside of this painting is this came out of the collection of a guy named Wally Sherwood. Wally Sherwood, if anybody knows Wally, Wally's father actually owned a company in town, and this is the turn of the century and after, that they made machines and they would hand grain lesser wood to look like oak, and then later on hand grain metal to look like oak, because even though you had a metal desk, you still wanted to think it was an oak desk. It was, all this was kind of popular up through maybe the 1920s, okay. Wally's father did very well. So this is the story from Wally. So one day his father's driving on the street in a 1912 Austin, which was a Grand Rapids made automobile for anybody that knows anything about the cars here. In 1912, their touring model cost $7,500, which when I read this at one time, I went, wow, that was a lot of money. Now, I only know that because, back in 1984, I had a painting of an Austin that had been painted by Matthias Alten for an ad that they ran, and he had the father and his wife and the son and his wife, and they were the people that, of course, ran the company. So supposedly, Wally's dad encounters Alten. Alten goes, geez, that's a nice looking car you've got there. He goes, when I'm ready to trade it in, I'll give you a call. And 2 years later, supposedly, this is how it goes, 1914, he calls him up and said, hey, I'm getting a new car. You said you were interested in my car. Well, Alten says, why don't you come over to my house? And he trades him 8 paintings. And this is one of the paintings. And there's one other painting in this collection that came. So what by this time what had happened is Wally had given his paintings really to his 3 children. And so his son decided just wasn't for him, so then it ends up becoming on the market. Of course, again, we had it cleaned. And this frame also had been painted, so we had that, again, new gold metal leaf applied. But kind of interesting because Alten painting, Alten frame. So what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do is kind of just move through time periods. So what we're going to do immediately is get away from Victorian frames because we really do not have a lot of Victorian paintings in here. So we're going to jump up a little bit to his trip to the Netherlands, which took place really August 1910 to August 1911. And this is kind of an interesting mixture of frames for these paintings. So we'll start here with something, again, a little bit of a leftover idea and style from the 19th century. This really is kind of based on maybe more of a French Barbizon frame. So the Barbizon school was kind of that 1850, certainly by 1900, still in existence. But really, for the most part, just starting to come to America. And kind of the first Barbizon school that was really set up in this country was about 1899 in Lyme, Connecticut, or Old Lyme. So Alten, like many of his contemporaries, painted kind of still a little bit in the Barbizon style. Same type of color palette, had a tendency to be a little more umbers. Certainly wasn't employing, say, French Impressionism, where you're using bright colors out of the tube. And of course, this was the original frame that came on this. Now here's the interesting thing. This is a bronze powder finish on this, but it's the original finish that Alten ordered. So Newcomb Macklin, that was one of the things they did. They produced about 38 different finishes in gold metal leaf, 38 different finishes in silver metal leaf. They did bronze powder, and they also did different types of gold leaf, or burnished gold leaf, or distressed gold leaf, or antiqued gold leaf. I don't think there was another company that ever existed like them. I suggested today, I think they probably might have made 4,000 different types of frames you could have walked in and seen, from a 1/2 inch wide to 18 inches wide. And now, so with these again, now ornament. So we're working with some type of ornament, and actually I was aware of the fact that ornament seemed to kind of come in, things that you could actually cast kind of came in maybe somewhere in the middle of the 18th century, but I actually found out, because I had to do some more research, about 1780 in England. This guy comes up with this concept, what type of ingredients can you put together to make something that is durable, but at the same time that you can mold if you want to. So he came up with this concoction of different elements that he could put together, that which was very hard. It was kind of like a rock if you knocked on it. But if you took some of it and put it on a table that was provided heat and steam, it softened up into modeling clay. So what all these are made out of reverse carvings. So here's a reverse carving for the corners, another one for the centers, another one for the interior strap, another one for the exterior strap, and another one for this area panel between the corners and centers. So right here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different molds had to be used in order to be able to put this frame together. So Newcomb had 4,000 reverse carved molds. The fourth floor was their ornamented place, and you walked up, the first time I was up there, it was a large factory building, but they had like 12-foot ceilings, and they had all this box, a lot of it was out of boxwood, a very hard wood, and they had them all lined up and all numbered, all 4,000 of them. And so it could be from something as small as this to something like this, to something like this, to something like this, or again, here, slightly you can see there's a similarity in it, but it's not the same. So go to a frame like this. Again, still, maybe we'll call this a mildly adjusted Barbizon frame. Still has some of the same elements, maybe a little more simplified in here, and now here done in a gold metal leaf finish. Now this painting did not, this came in a really, not a very good frame. So this was something I have in stock, because I generally have a tendency to buy and accumulate. Anytime I see Newcomb frames in near excellent condition, I buy them and put them aside with this idea that one day I'm going to use it. And then occasionally I do. And then 200 times I don't. But I still got some life to live here. So, so another frame, again, similar type of style, certainly bigger corners. Notice both of these, just to get back here a little bit, this is a one, again, just like this frame over here. Here's one member, there's another member, there's a third member. Here, we're just dealing with the outside member and an interior liner, which is the same thing here. So this is a 3.5-inch wide molding with this kind of 1.5-inch liner. The interesting thing here is already, just in these three, you can see the diversity in a finish already. Something, much more of the red is showing through. This is part of a process of finishing. So that's called a red clay base, but many people call it a bowl, B-O-L-E. And generally they came in about 4 different colors you could use: black, red, yellow, blue. And depending on the color of the bowl underneath, depending on the color or tint of the gold metal leaf or silver metal leaf applied, depends on what type of tone you put on top of that, what type of dry color or dust you put on top of that, and how you rubbed it back through or abraded the surface. So in order to get this, then they would call that red rub, which means you would kind of rub through some of the gold metal leaf to reveal that underneath, okay? So now we'll jump kind of to what happened to Newcomb around 1900 to 1905. They started to develop what was known as the American carved corner frame. So we got away from ornament. Because why? It was Victorian. Hey, we want something that's more new. So it almost came more of what you would say, maybe a little bit of the arts and crafts movement. So a simplification, but at the same time, it didn't have to always be simple. So we'll go to something like this. So again, this specific one is just a single piece. Once in a while, Newcomb made them where this would be an outside cap and that would be an inside panel, but this particular one is a single piece. Now, if we pulled this off the wall, though, it may not have the spline, because when you get to the interior of this, it's quite thin. So it would be too thin to want to route that out to put that spline in it. So this would be a case in which they wouldn't always put the spline in. But again, this all hand carved. No detail in here. Once in a while they'd add that. That's something actually you could get or not get. On their sample they might say, oh, well, you want the notches on the interior or no notches? And then, of course, a nice gold metal leaf finish in a brighter finish. Now this one did not come, this painting did not come with this, but again, something I had in my inventory, so it happened to work with the right size. Thank God, Alten almost generally painted in standard sizes. So go over to this one. This is a period frame. And so this came on this painting. And so again, ordered around 1911. Way too late in my career, 15 years ago. Even though I knew there were these numbers on the back that indicated customer numbers, maybe I failed to absorb the fact that that would give me a great idea of being able to date every frame based on the customer number, because here and there, when you know, it's the original frame on a painting from 1911, then that customer number almost always has to indicate that the time period it was made is around 1911. So therefore you could have these kind of checkpoints, because now you might get a Newcomb frame in with a painting that's undated, but you see the customer number and you go, oh, I think that's done around 1922 based on the number. So it's been 15 years now I've been keeping track of this, so I'm starting to catch up on what I lost for the first 27 years here. Jim Straub has asked if I'm going to publish that, so everybody can be aware of that. I said, no, I'm taking it right to my grave and let everybody else figure out their own way. But no, another nice, I mean, what a great job of carving. This was a frame I have probably seen on 5 or 6 Alten paintings over the time period. He liked it, so he kept going back to it. The painting above this, again, done in the same time period, 1910, 1911. It did not come in that frame. This painting came back here. That came from a guy from New York City who actually, he was the owner of a place called Illustration House, but he had original connection to Grand Rapids, and of course his parents had collected this. It goes out to New York, comes back here, George sees it, but we needed a better frame. So this was carved by a spin-off of Newcomb. And supposedly this is the story, 1934, Newcomb is owned by 2 brothers, or 2, I think they were brother-in-laws, that somehow came to a point they were going to split up. So one of the brother-in-laws with the last name of Hussar says, in the middle of the night, this is the story, takes a group of samples and goes and forms his own business. And they continued to carve things that were, for the most part, and finish things just like Newcomb did, although certainly not with quite the great variety that Newcomb did, because really, who can do this? So a gold medal leaf finish, but certainly newer. But it's interesting, though, to be able to see period, 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 gold medal leaf, or excuse me, not period, all these other ones that are periods, and then you start to look at this, and it still seems to blend in. It isn't something that sticks out at you. There are some galleries that deal in paintings of this time period that put gold leaf frames on them. And you go, there's nothing wrong with a gold leaf frame, but most paintings weren't meant to have them on because the coloration just isn't right. So it just seems to make the painting, if you over varnish an old painting and put a gold medal or a gold leaf frame on it, it looks like it's new. It doesn't look anymore like it has some type of age to it. So I'm not really a proponent of that. I like these that seem to be more fitting with the time period they were painted in. So here's a little bit of a different thing. On all these paintings, one frame is the original frame, or an original period frame, which is this frame. So it did not come on this painting, but again, one that this frame came into my life because a woman brought me an Alten painting that had that frame on it, and she said, "It is hideous." And I said, "Well, gosh, we can correct that." And I said, "Geez, and if you don't want to keep the frame, I'd certainly be glad to give you some credit." And she said, "Oh my God, I'll take it." I said, "Perfect." So it was a nice deal, if I can say that. Because I went, oh my God, 4-inch carved frame. And as Barbara was saying, here, definitely, certainly something that lends itself a little more to almost a nouveau type of carving. But seemed to just fit this. And again, this is a frame that Alten himself did order. It just happened to come in on a different painting. Or he put it on a different painting. Then we'll go through these. So my aim with these, of course, is to try to pick frames again that hopefully still continue to keep in the feeling of what Alten himself might do. I don't want to suppose that I know what he was going to do, but pick frames that had feelings from that time period, this one or this one. A little bit of a different frame here, so I'm going to jump right back to something I just criticized other people for. That is a gold leaf frame. But it is a little bit more of a high-keyed colored painting, and we did use something that's a little bit more of a toned gold leaf panel versus completely gold leaf, which I think would have been a little too reflective. Over here, kind of same thing. This is actually based upon an old Newcomb sampler that I took out of the Newcomb factory. No one was making it. No one had made it in however many years. So I took it down to Hussar and said, Jeff, I got a project for you, which he always says, I'm not carving any new frames. And I go, but I'm going to pay you. Okay. Then he would carve a new frame. So, and I think they did a nice job with it. All hand carved. Now, the interesting thing here, too, is that one of the things that seems to work with Alten's paintings, and we see that on even some of his original frames out here, is the panels, even though they're smooth, they do have a certain undulation to them called tooling. So you take anybody that's done any wood carving, it's got a little channel in it that's half rounded, and you start to soften this, and it seems to really work well with the brush strokes. So both of those have that, and this a little bit in here too. Now, interesting is that some of these frames were chosen a little bit more for this gallery wall versus this one, which I chose and just put on it because, you know, sometimes 3 inches is enough to go around, but as you start to get into areas that are this large, suddenly the 4-inch frame seems to be more appropriate for the size. So the scale needs to be just a little larger in order, I think, for it to have more of a museum quality feel. Not that there's anything wrong with this frame, but that was the one thing, is that sometimes you're choosing something for a situation you think is going to be a home environment, and it ends up going to a different environment. On the frame that we put on the painting of San Juan Capistrano, Alten's choice. This was Alten's choice, for the most part, almost the same exact frame. Okay, and this was original to this painting. And so you can see that it was something certainly that he was still thinking of, kind of in the same time period. This, I believe, is from 28. Do we have, no, 22, okay. So again, now today with my specialized knowledge of the customer numbers, one of the things about Alten painting in Valencia, he won in 1912, he won in 1922, he won in 1928. The paintings from 1912, he would either indicate Matthias Alten 1912, Matthias Alten Valencia, Matthias Alten Valencia 1912. His second 2 trips, he just put Cabanel. So only one of any of those paintings from those 2 trips, which numbers about 100 paintings Jim's recorded, has a date. Just one says 1922. So all the rest of them, Jim, who is has put this catalog resume out and tries to be accurate. So if he finds, oh, that was illustrated in a newspaper article about an exhibition that Alten had in 1922 or 1923, or it was in a checklist from an exhibition in 1924. Well, it has to be then 22 versus 28. But now that I've come up with this numbering system here and there, we went, oh, that has to be now here, because now we see the number coordinates more to one year versus the other. Not that it isn't kind of splitting hairs for most people, but Jim's idea and mine is, why not be accurate if we can? So here, this is all carved. So kind of an interesting thing about it is this: if you think of all this stuff is, so there's 2 ways to make sculptures. There's the additive process. You take clay, you build it up. There's a reductive process. You take wood, you carve it. You take marble, you carve it. So you're reducing, the volume you have. Frames are the same. So everyone can be an expert pretty quickly. You go, it looks like this might have started a little higher, and all they did is carve this little bit of area out. This is really subtle carving here. In some ways, it only took a 1/16 of an inch off of this, but it really reveals this ornament. Whereas the other ones, you can immediately see an ornamented frame. It's difficult. Was that carved? It took somebody a long time if that was carved. Let's skip to this one here, because this is another period frame and was unique to this particular painting. Slightly different style again, based a little bit on the same one, a similar one to the narrow one we saw in here on the Dutch scene. Wider panel, little heavier outside, but of course it's a lot larger painting too. And then of course nicely carved in the corner. Here, no tooling. And again, a finish that came through really in relatively great condition. More than likely, again, it was hanging on the wall in somebody's house and just enjoyed, so therefore it was not abused. This is a frame that was put on. Here's the interesting thing about that. I'm going, we're putting carved frames on everything. How many, and it isn't like we have Nuka Macklin anymore where we can have 100 different carvings. We're now dealing with a more finite number of different carvings. And I went, I just can't have every painting hanging next to each other in the exact or near the exact same frame. So I thought, well, I'm going to break ranks a little bit here and put an ornamented frame on it. So this is one that is an ornamented frame that's kind of rare to do on these, or for me to do anyway. That it wasn't a period frame either. This was something that we certainly had made for it. This used to hang actually over the fireplace of another Grand Rapids artist home. If you're familiar with Orville Bowman, who is a Grand Rapids artist, born here about 1904, attended Central High School. His father owned the Bowman Paper Cutter Company. They were fairly wealthy. He went to, I think, University of Michigan, studied art, and worked in his father's company, did some amateur work, but then his father died, so he had to kind of take over the company. But by 1946, he felt, well, we're doing pretty well. And he and his wife, they never had children, had this home down in Palm Beach. So he thought, well, heck, I'm gonna live in Palm Beach 5 months out of the year, fly back, or take the train back, or fly back when I need to, and I'm gonna paint the rest of the time. So he started painting all those scenes that were either of Florida, many though of Haiti, or many inventive things where there would be like arcs out in the ocean with a potentate up here being fanned by women with feathers in their hair or fruit on their head, or I've had some of them. Yeah, actually, I can give you the book on Bowman. I wish. I had them when they didn't sell for quite as much money. But suddenly, actually, when Donald Trump bought Mar-a-Lago, he had his sale and sold everything that was in it because, of course, he didn't want the old stuff that Marjorie Merriweather Post collected. But what she did have is 8 large Bowman paintings. And of course, Bowman was well thought of in Palm Beach. And he was his own interesting character, not to break away from our frame things, but so he paints for a while, like 1946 to 1951, 52, 53, decides, hey, I'd like to have a gallery show. So he goes to a place, there's a place called the Hammer Gallery, has a place in New York, has a place in Palm Beach. Says, hey, I'd like to show you my work. I think I'd like to have an exhibition. And they look at his work and say, no, I don't think we're interested. He goes, well, let me ask you, would you ever rent me your gallery? Well, yeah, I guess we could rent your gallery. Okay, how about I rent your gallery for 2 weeks, and I'm going to hang an exhibition of my work. Just invite my friends. So he does this. So again, this is one of these folklore stories that may be completely factual. He hangs the show. He puts prices on them. He walks through before the opening and marks every piece sold. Then opens the door, and all these people come in that are all his friends from Palm Beach. Now, the Hammer Gallery people are not dense. They go, look who his friends are. And everybody's walking around going, my God, we didn't have a chance even to buy one? Well, they immediately scheduled another show for him. And then he had to show every year for them for many years in a row, and of course, sold many paintings. Then they got to the point that, they weren't not as in vogue. They remind you of kind of somebody who had seen a lot of Henry Rousseau paintings, so there's a certain naive quality to them, but he was certainly a serious artist. But so this hung over his fireplace, and I got a call one day from his nephew and was able to get that, and of course, George saw it, and the rest is history as it ends up here. So kind of the last of the talk here will kind of involve these. We're talking about our deal of the Austin automobile, painting number 2, that was in one of the ones in trade for that automobile. A nice painting from Valencia, 1912. Alten, the one thing about him is he certainly did, you know, hauling the boats in, hauling the boats out, people waiting on shore for the fishermen to return. They were sardine fishermen. Supposedly the story was they would go out at about 5 or 6 at night. They would fish during the night, because why? In Spain it's so hot during the day you cannot be out and the fish are not coming to the surface. But at night they do. And so then they would come in the morning. So now this is a little bit of a hybrid frame. You can see tooling here, so therefore there's carving to it, but you can also see it's ornamented. So it's carved and ornamented. Certainly something that Newcomb did in its original gold medal leaf finish. And again, something that for the most part was certainly hung on a wall and enjoyed. Down here, probably the most unusual frame in here. This was not original to this piece. I had purchased this and thought one day I'm going to have the painting that's going to come in that is going to kind of work with, because it's just so different and unusual. So I needed something with some real power, which I always saw in this. This is one of the few paintings that you can really see the oxen struggling to pull that boat out. And that's what they did, because it was not a deep harbor, you know, harbored on the beach. So you had these teams of oxen, or sometimes 2 or 3 teams of oxen that would depend on the size of the boat, pull them out until they could float, and then on the return, of course, pull them in until they could, you know, brace them up on the beach for the night or for the day. But kind of just a very, again, interesting gold medal leaf finish, but just another example of what Newcomb was able to do. Yes?
You notice there's seams in the bottom of that picture, the bottom frame there. Is that made section on it?
Yes, the ornament itself, yeah, like right here. Yeah, so in other words, this ornament was this long, and then they would lay it out. So here and there on some type of ornamented frames, you can certainly see it. I think the thinner the ornament is, perhaps on occasion, the more pronounced it can be.
It's not as obvious on the top, but maybe it's just the light.
I think it's there it is. There's usually the case with it is when the light hits on the bottom, or generally what happens is if you, say you have a frame and you go, a period frame, and you go, it has this one little flaw. Generally you want to put that flaw on the bottom, because your eye usually travels up. But when you're sitting in an environment like this where the lights are coming down, sometimes it becomes more apparent on the bottom. So that's kind of the mini talk here.